As we get closer to the Iowa caucus, the feud between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz continues to heat up. Major Garrett has that part of the story.
He was very pro-choice. He supported partial birth abortion. He was open to gay marriage. And his explanation for all of that, he said, I'm a New Yorker. I'm from Manhattan.
Ted Cruz again went after Donald Trump's defense of New York values.
Those are what New York values are. They're not Iowa values.
Trump countered that Cruz has failed to fully disclose loans from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, arguing that help from New York banks make his closest rival a hypocrite.
He wants to look like Robin Hood, that he's the one protecting the people from the banks. Well, he's actually borrowing money.
Trump also rolled out a new schoolyard attack on his rival.
He's a nasty guy. Nobody likes him. Nobody in Congress likes him. Nobody likes him anywhere once they get to know him.
And he was critical of Cruz's support for Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, who twice helped Obamacare survive legal challenges. In 2005, Cruz backed Roberts' confirmation, calling him a brilliant lawyer.
Cruz fought like hell to get Justice Roberts in there. Justice Roberts turned out to be an absolute disaster.
One of the reasons that I like Ted Cruz so much.
A super PAC backing Cruz produced this ad, turning Trump's extravagant praise of Cruz against him.
He shouldn't be controversial because what he's doing is right.
Senator Marco Rubio also kept Cruz in his crosshairs, calling the Texas senator a flip-flopper.
I believe I'm the only one in the primary field that can unite the Republican Party. And I know this, Hillary Clinton does not want to run against me.
And Major Garrett joins us now from Washington to talk about this. Major, we heard Donald Trump talking at Liberty University. He's now trying to focus on that evangelical vote, reading scripture. And this is kind of interesting, especially now that Ted Cruz is gaining a lot of momentum there. So how important is that vote now that we're only 2 weeks away?
Well, look, when the exit polls were conducted in 2012 during the Iowa caucuses, 57% of those who attended the caucuses, about 121,000, said that they were self-identified evangelical Christians. So they're a considerable amount of the likely caucus turnout come February 1st. Here's one interesting fact to consider, though. When we sat down with the Republican officials from Iowa who were visiting South Carolina last week for the most recent Republican televised primetime debate, they told us that they think the turnout on caucus night this time around could be 20,000, possibly 30,000 voters larger than it was in 2012. Well, what does that do to the importance, the centrality, if you will, of the evangelical Christian vote? Well, maybe some of those will be evangelical Christians. Maybe there'll be others. Maybe there'll be Democrats or long dormant Republicans getting back into the process for the first time. And these Republican officials we talked to said they suspect a good portion of this extra turnout or unexpectedly large turnout above 2012 could in fact be Trump supporters. And if that is in fact the case, Trump will be a very important factor in Iowa. He could be such an important factor he could win those Iowa caucuses, not only because he did well enough among all the known constituencies in Iowa, but he enlarged the turnout so much, and most of that enlarged turnout went to him. It's still an open question. Will those people show up, yes or no? But I can tell you, Republican officials planning the caucuses in Iowa are girding for turnout much larger than they saw in 2012, and they believe a good portion of that larger turnout will be Trump voters.
Major, the UK Parliament has been debating whether or not to ban Donald Trump from entering the country. It's unlikely that that will lead to any results in the UK, but how could it impact voters in the US?
I really don't know, and I'm not really sure it will, for a couple of reasons. One, it's not insignificant that a long-standing, important ally of the United States, a country with which we have tremendous political, cultural, economic ties, finds itself in a position of needing to discuss whether or not to ban the leading presidential candidate for a major party, in this case the Republican Party, from even entering its country. That's not an insignificant issue. And yet it is a symbolic gesture, but it's one, it appears to me, the Brits are undertaking to send a signal to the United States, hey, we're not comfortable with this and we're your friends. Just think about, if you will, American voters, what your enemies might think about this, or what countries that are not nearly as friendly with you are not looking out for your best interests as we in Britain are. It seems to me symbolically that's important. That's a signal that's trying to be sent by the Brits. I'm not sure it's going to be heard, generally speaking, in this country, and I'm even less certain it's going to be heard by Republican voters, who, for those in the Trump camp, nothing appears to be strong enough or a signal or symbolic enough to dislodge them from their support of Donald Trump. And if you're with Ted Cruz or somebody else, You've already decided you're not going to vote for Donald Trump, so that's not going to matter to you all that much. So I'm interested in the fact that this debate is going on. Like so many other things in this campaign, it has no precedent. And because it has no precedent, it's hard to measure. But I don't think it's insignificant. I just don't think in the end it will matter very much. It could be both significant and meaningless, which would, again, be part of this campaign, something we've never seen before.
Major, turning back to Iowa, we're only 2 weeks away from those caucuses. What are the establishment candidates doing to gain some momentum there?
Working as hard as they can and drawing decent-sized crowds, and they're all doing respectable within their lane of so-called establishment mainstream. And I know that is not a very helpful metric for people who are watching this campaign, because they're going to say to themselves, well, what's so much more moderate between John Kasich or Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush or Chris Christie? They're all pretty conservative, aren't they? And the answer to that question is yes. They're just not Donald Trump, who is a factor all by himself, or Ted Cruz, a member of the United States Senate who has made it a habit and sort of made it a cottage industry to take on the so-called Republican leadership in Washington. But it's not as if there is one defined super moderate Republican out there. I mean, maybe Kasich is a little bit in that direction, but they're all fundamentally very conservative. But what they're trying to do is vie for whatever votes out there have not been locked down by Cruz or Donald Trump. And in Iowa, that means coming in somewhere in a respectable third, fourth, or fifth. In New Hampshire, it means coming in a strong second. Here is the problem in that category of Republicans who aren't Trump and Cruz. They're all working really hard. They're doing credibly as far as the crowds they draw and the ability to raise enough money to keep themselves on the air and run a decent campaign. All of that is true. The problem is there's too many of them for those voters who are looking for an alternative to Trump and Cruz to be mathematically significant enough to knock Cruz or Trump out. And until one of these two or three of these so-called establishment alternatives drop out of the race, that can't happen. The math just divides all that non-Trump, non-Cruz vote. And these people are probably not going to get out of the race. I've not talked to a single campaign that thinks it's going to even make a decision about that until South Carolina, which means Iowa and New Hampshire proceed exactly as they are. Everyone's scraping and vying for whatever votes they can. And that is good for their campaigns until it's not good enough for an establishment figure to rise up, coalesce the vote, and possibly take some of the wind out of the sails of Trump or Cruz. So that math plays very well for Trump and Cruz, less well for these so-called establishment or mainstream Republican alternatives.
Major Garrett, thanks so much.
Sure.